The red dust of Mars clung to everything. The walls of the colony, the thin dome that encapsulated what remained of human civilization, the pale faces of those who still survived. It was a world of perpetual twilight, where the sun seemed more like a distant memory than a real presence. The air outside was nothing but a dry promise of death, and yet, inside the dome, humanity clung to life like a fading ember in the wind. Astrid Ray had never been one for optimism. The daughter of the last scientist to leave Earth before it crumbled into a toxic, forgotten wasteland, she was raised on the edge of survival. There was no room for dreams on Mars. Not anymore. Not after everything that had happened. She sat in the lab now, staring at the half-finished data screens in front of her. The numbers blinked dully in the dim light of the artificial room. The same cold calculations that had greeted her every day for the past 5 years. But today was different. Today something was off. The air in the lab felt heavier, and it wasn't just the faint hum of the life support systems beginning to fail once again. Her hand trembled as she typed in the command to access the planetary archive. She had been working on a project for months, attempting to map the subsoil for hidden resources, scanning for anything that could extend the life of the colony. The last few weeks had been spent on this corner of Mars, an ancient valley buried deep beneath the Martian surface. There were rumors, whispers that the red planet had once hosted more than just dust storms and barren landscapes. They were just stories, dismissed as the fantasies of settlers desperate to believe in something greater than themselves. But now there was something that the scans couldn't explain. The data wasn't adding up, and it gnawed at Astrid's mind like a piece of metal scraping on glass. The Martian soil beneath her feet had been a graveyard for so long, but her screens told her there were hidden structures, far deeper than anything humanity had managed to build. A civilization. Astrid's heart thudded in her chest. Could it be true? Was there a forgotten history on this barren planet? One that could save the last remnants of humanity? She leaned closer to the console, typing a new set of commands to search for any anomalies in the area. Her fingers flew over the keys, her breath catching in her throat as the scans pinged back. A structure. Not just one. Multiple. Perfectly symmetrical, buried deep beneath the Martian surface. Her eyes widened. A sudden flash of motion caught her peripheral vision. A human silhouette framed by the dim, artificial light from the corridor outside. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Did you find it?" came the voice, familiar and rough with the weight of too many years spent in the shadows of a dying world. "Luca." She glanced over at him, his face worn with the exhaustion of years spent in the endless fight to keep their small colony alive. His dark eyes locked onto hers, sensing the shift in the air, the tension that lingered between them. "I think so," Astrid said, her voice quieter than usual. "There's something here, Luca. Something. It's not from Earth." Luca moved into the lab, looking at the data on the screen. His brow furrowed as he took in the sequence of readings, his sharp mind immediately processing the implications. Another relic? Another dead Martian city? Like the others? Astrid shook her head. "No, this is different. These structures are unlike anything we've ever seen. And they're too precise. The geometry doesn't make sense for natural formation or even for the technology we've developed." Luca ran a hand through his dark hair, a sign of his nervous energy. "So, what are you saying? That this might be the key to saving us? Maybe?" She hesitated. "If we can reach it, we don't even know how deep it is. It's buried under miles of rock, but we have the equipment to scan." "No," Luca interrupted, his voice sharp. "We don't have the resources to waste on another. Maybe the colony is on the edge, Astrid. The last of our food reserves are gone. We don't have time for fantasies. We have to prepare for what's next." "I'm not wasting time," she said, her tone firm. "But if this civilization is real, if there's something down there, something that can help us—" She stopped herself, the words catching in her throat. "Something that can help us" sounded like the last desperate hope of a dying species. But the coldness in Luca's gaze told her he didn't want to hear it. "What makes you think this is any different from the hundreds of times we've gotten our hopes up?" Luca's voice was barely above a whisper now, like he feared the silence that would follow. She couldn't answer him. She didn't have the words. But in the pit of her stomach, there was a stirring that felt like both terror and hope. Because deep down, Astrid knew. If there was even the faintest chance that the answers were buried beneath their feet, then Mars, this forsaken place, had one last secret to offer. One last chance. But it came at a price. "I'm going to the site," she said, standing up. "I'm not asking for permission." Luca's eyes flashed with concern, but he didn't stop her. Instead, he stepped back, the weight of their shared history pulling at the corners of his mouth in a bitter smile. "Then take the rover. You might get farther than we ever did with our drills." Astrid grabbed her pack, her mind already working through the logistics of what lay ahead. If there was any chance of salvation for the last human colony on Mars, it would lie in the ruins of the past. She didn't care about the risks anymore. The colony would die without a miracle, and miracles on Mars were not found in the sky. They were hidden in the dust. As the hatch door sealed behind her, she heard Luca's voice one last time. "Be careful, Astrid." But the words were lost in the hum of the rover's engines, fading away as the Martian landscape stretched out before her. Vast, empty, and waiting. The silence of Mars seemed to swallow her whole as she drove toward the unknown. She didn't know if she would make it back. But one thing was clear. The last hope for humanity had been buried here, beneath the dust, the stone, and the silence of an ancient world. And she was going to find it. Chapter 2. Echoes beneath the surface. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the haunting cry of a planet that had once been alive. Mars had always been a quiet world, but today it felt different, oppressive, as if the landscape itself was holding its breath, watching Astrid as she made her way toward the unknown. The rover hummed steadily beneath her, its lights casting long shadows against the red, rocky terrain. The wheels crunched over the brittle soil, each movement dragging her closer to the heart of the anomaly. It was a journey she had taken countless times before, but this time, there was no certainty in the destination. In the back of her mind, Astrid could hear the argument from earlier still ringing. Luca's words, always practical, always tethered to survival, but they had failed to shake her. She had no more time for hesitation. The colony's dwindling resources were a ticking clock, and every moment she wasted felt like a heartbeat lost. As the rover skidded across a large basin, she glanced out toward the horizon. A thick layer of Martian clouds had begun to gather in the sky, a strange sight, considering how rare they were. The atmosphere of Mars wasn't thick enough to support traditional weather systems, but the dust storms had always brought with them a peculiar feeling of impending doom. Her scanner pinged, pulling her attention back to the task at hand. The coordinates were close now, just a few kilometers ahead. She tapped the console, adjusting the frequency of the signal. The Martian structures were still deep underground, but the scanner was showing signs of something she couldn't quite explain. It was a frequency, faint at first but growing stronger as she drew closer. An echo of activity. Astrid felt a flicker of excitement surge through her chest. Could it be? Could the structures themselves be active? No, that was impossible. The Martian civilization had been gone for millennia. No one had ever truly found evidence of advanced life here. Not before, and not now. It must have been a trick of the scanner, a malfunction in the system. Yet, she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that told her something was very, very wrong. A jolt ran through the rover, knocking her from her thoughts. She quickly gripped the wheel, trying to steady herself. The ground had shifted beneath her, and now the rover was tilting at an alarming angle. Not now, she muttered under her breath, fighting against the instinct to panic. The rover jerked again, harder this time, and then everything went silent. She held her breath, waiting. The scanner showed no signs of an impact zone, no reason for the sudden instability. Slowly, she lifted her gaze toward the horizon. It was there, a faint outline of something, tall, angular, and wrong. The shadows it cast stretched longer than the laws of physics allowed, flickering across the barren land like the remnants of some forgotten dream. The image seemed to waver in the distance, but as Astrid pushed the rover forward, the object remained firm in her vision. Her heart pounded in her chest as the rover slowly crept toward the dark shape. The Martian city, or whatever it was, loomed ahead. It wasn't like the crumbling ruins she'd studied in the archives, the broken stone buildings and half-submerged chambers left by the planet's ancient inhabitants. No, this was something else. It moved. Astrid's hands shook as she brought the rover to a halt, her breath caught in her throat. The structure in front of her wasn't just a relic of the past. It was alive, or at least, it was moving. Slowly, ever so slowly, it twisted and shifted as though it were coming to life, adjusting itself to the surrounding environment. The hum from her scanner was louder now, almost deafening, and the frequency was unmistakably artificial. There was no mistake. Whatever this was, it had been designed. She stepped out of the rover, the air outside biting at her skin, a reminder of just how fragile humanity's hold on this planet truly was. She adjusted her helmet, checking the oxygen levels before reaching for her tools. Every instinct told her to turn back, to call for help, to tell Luca what she had found. But it was too late for that. She was already here. And there was something far more important now. The knowledge that the colony's future, her future, might rest on what lay beneath the Martian surface. Astrid moved forward cautiously, the Martian soil crunching under her boots as she approached the structure. The shape was now fully visible, its form outlined against the orange hue of the sky. It appeared to be a massive pillar, perhaps 20 meters tall, with geometric patterns that shifted like liquid stone. She reached out a gloved hand to touch the surface of the object, half expecting it to be cold and unyielding. But the moment her fingers made contact, the pillar pulsed, once, twice, and then ripples of energy spread outward, vibrating through the ground beneath her feet. The ground trembled. Astrid's breath caught in her throat as the pillar's surface began to change. What had once been a smooth, alien material now cracked open like the shell of an egg, revealing a complex network of lines and symbols. The patterns were unlike anything she had ever seen. They hummed with a faint, electric energy, as if the Martians, whoever or whatever they were, had encoded some kind of message, a message meant to be read only by those who knew how to listen. A low, resonating tone reverberated from deep within the structure. It was like the sound of a distant wind, but with a metallic undertone that made Astrid's spine prickle. Suddenly, the ground shook again, harder this time, and the light from the object intensified. No, 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 she whispered to herself, taking a step back, but before she could turn, the air around her seemed to distort, as though the very atmosphere was bending. The symbols on the pillar flashed brighter and faster, and then, just as quickly as it had started, the world went silent. For a long moment, there was only the dust, swirling in the wake of whatever had just happened. Astrid's heart pounded as she slowly raised her helmet visor, staring at the now still pillar. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. Then, in the silence, she heard a voice. It was faint, like a whisper carried on the wind, but it was unmistakable. "Welcome, human." Chapter 3. The Forgotten Ones. The voice echoed in her mind long after the last word had been spoken. Astrid stood frozen, her fingers still gripping the rover's emergency brake, heart pounding in her chest. The Martian wind swirled around her, a cold, unyielding presence that seemed to brush against her skin like the fingers of something unseen. "Welcome, human." The words reverberated, pressing against her skull. But it wasn't just the voice that unsettled her. It was the certainty with which it had spoken. There was no hesitation, no distortion. It had been clear, deliberate, as if it knew she was coming. The pillar in front of her had stopped shifting, the crackling hum now silent. Its surface had gone still, its patterns frozen in place. Astrid cautiously took a step closer, her eyes flicking over the intricate symbols that had emerged in its wake. They were not like the ancient Martian glyphs she had seen in her studies. These were sharper, more refined, as though they had been carved into the stone by some advanced intelligence, far beyond anything humanity had ever achieved. She reached out again, her gloved hand trembling as it hovered near the pillar's surface. "What are you?" The thought flashed in her mind before she could stop it. The answer came instantly, like a spark igniting something deep within her consciousness. Not what? Who? She whispered to herself, the realization dawning on her. This wasn't some ancient artifact. It wasn't a forgotten ruin left behind by a long-dead civilization. No, this was something else entirely. A low pulse emitted from the pillar, barely perceptible at first, and then it intensified. The air seemed to vibrate in harmony with the frequency, making her bones hum in response. Astrid staggered back, her instincts screaming for her to run, to find shelter, to escape whatever was about to unfold. But curiosity, and something deeper, a drive she couldn't name, rooted her to the spot. She had come too far to turn back now. She braced herself, taking a deep breath as the world seemed to bend around her. The patterns on the pillar flickered again, and a new set of symbols appeared, like an intricate puzzle waiting to be solved. The voice, if it could even be called a voice, came again, louder this time, though it still felt as if it were being whispered directly into her mind. You seek answers. Astrid swallowed hard, the words twisting in her gut. The voice seemed to know her, know what she was here for. But some answers are better left unanswered. A chill shot through her, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts swimming in her head. This wasn't just a communication from the past. No, this entity was alive, somehow connected to the structures, to the pulse she had felt deep beneath the surface of Mars. She stepped forward again, this time reaching out to touch the surface of the pillar. The moment her fingers made contact, a flood of images filled her mind. Her breath caught in her throat as visions, frantic and jumbled, flashed before her eyes. She saw vast cityscapes, their towers stretching toward an alien sky. Unfamiliar beings moved in the shadows of those cities, their forms lit by glowing symbols, their faces, if they had faces, hidden in the dark. The images shifted. She saw an explosion, a catastrophic event, a world torn apart. Mars, red and lifeless, was not the planet it was now. It had been once filled with life, with technology, with people. And then, as quickly as it had all appeared, it was gone. The cities crumbled. The civilizations fell. Mars had become nothing more than a graveyard. She stumbled back, her mind racing to process the overwhelming flood of memories that hadn't been hers. She gasped, her pulse quickening. What was she seeing? Was it a vision of the past? Or was it something else? The pillar pulsed again, and suddenly, the image of the beings, the Martians, became clearer. They were tall, humanoid in form, but their skin was an ethereal shade of silver. Their eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence, their expressions cold and distant. They had fled. But where had they gone? Why had they abandoned their world, their technology, their civilization? The air crackled with a strange energy once more, and before she could understand what was happening, a deep voice, not the whisper anymore, but a forceful declaration, echoed in her mind once again. The time of the Earthborn is over. Astrid's heart stopped. The words felt like a sentence, not a greeting. This world will be your tomb, just as it was ours. A violent surge of energy erupted from the pillar, sending Astrid crashing to the ground. Her head struck the rough Martian soil, stars exploding in her vision. For a moment, she could barely breathe, the weight of the shock still pulsing through her body. Her helmet cracked slightly from the impact, a small fissure forming along the side. She could feel the pressure of the oxygen system weakening, but it was the pounding in her skull that worried her more. She pushed herself up, her hands shaking as she reached for the comms device at her side. "Luca," she whispered hoarsely, gasping for air as she staggered to her feet. "Luca, are you there?" There was no answer. She repeated the call, but static was all that returned. The pillar pulsed once more, brighter this time, as if to answer her unspoken question. "You are not ready." The voice was unyielding. Final. Astrid's eyes darted to the horizon. There was no sign of the rover, no sign of any other human presence. The landscape was empty. She felt small, insignificant, as though the very planet had swallowed everything around her, leaving her alone with the unanswered question. What did they want? What was left for her to learn? The sky above had begun to darken, the winds picking up, and Astrid's breath came in shallow gasps. The Martian landscape seemed to close in around her as the pillar stood silent, its strange energy still crackling faintly. She had made a terrible mistake. The ancient Martians had warned her. The voice had spoken of the Earthborn, of those who had come to conquer, to take what they could. But she wasn't ready for the truth. She wasn't ready to understand the implications of the civilization she had uncovered. And yet, as the sky darkened further, she knew she had no choice. There was no turning back now. Chapter 4. The Price of Knowledge. Astrid staggered away from the pillar, the world around her spinning as the aftershocks of the vision reverberated through her mind. Her helmet felt heavy, the crack in the visor a constant reminder of the violent energy that had just coursed through her body. The static on the comms device buzzed angrily in her ear, and she slammed it down against her belt in frustration. No contact. No help. The winds picked up again, swirling the red dust in a blinding gust that cut through her suit's defenses. The Martian landscape seemed to close in on her as the last traces of light from the distant sun began to fade. The horizon, once an open sea of red and orange, now felt like the edges of a forgotten world, imprisoning, suffocating. The faint hum of the Martian pillar still buzzed in her ears, a reminder of the danger that loomed just below the surface. The vision, those images of the Martian cities, the beings, the explosion, flashed through her mind again, violent and disorienting. There was no time to make sense of it. She had to move. But where could she go? What had she learned? And what was the cost of this knowledge? A low groan escaped her as she looked back at the pillar. The symbols had returned to their quiet, unreadable form, as if nothing had happened. No indication that it had spoken to her, that it had shown her what it had. A voice, not hers, broke the silence. "Why are you still standing here?" Astrid whipped around, heart hammering, expecting to see something, someone else in the darkening landscape. But no, it was only the wind, the dust. There was nothing, nothing except the pillar, still impossibly silent. The voice in her head was fading too, growing more distant. But she couldn't forget the words. "This world will be your tomb, just as it was ours." She shook her head, her breath coming fast, trying to clear her mind of the fog that had settled over it. What did they mean? What was happening here? There had to be something more. There had to be some deeper purpose to all of this. Luca's face flashed in her mind. He'll never forgive me for this. Astrid set her jaw, determined. She couldn't go back empty-handed. Not now. Not after all this. The colony would die if she didn't find a way to use what she'd discovered, no matter the cost. The rover was still parked where she'd left it. She made her way back, every step feeling heavier. The pulsing from the pillar behind her seemed to reach through the red dust, echoing through her bones. She reached the rover, pulling herself inside and sealing the door. For a moment, she just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring into the dark expanse before her. The radio was still silent, her thoughts drifting back to the last words of the Martian entity. "You are not ready." She had to find out what they meant. Not ready for what? There was only one way to find out. Fingers trembling, she brought up the data on the rover's console. The scanner, still active, had picked up further signals, strange pulses coming from beneath the surface. Patterns, frequencies that hadn't existed before. This wasn't just an abandoned city. This was a functioning network, a system, and it was still alive. Astrid hesitated, her gut twisted with unease. The voice had warned her, had made it clear that the knowledge she sought could cost her everything. But what choice did she have? There were only so many days left. The colony was starving. The oxygen reserves were dwindling. The last of the food shipments failed. The water reclamation systems were barely holding up. Every life was in jeopardy. And if she didn't find something, the last humans would die here, in the dust, without ever understanding what had truly happened to Mars. Damn it, she muttered to herself, setting her jaw. She tapped the screen, initiating a deeper scan of the signals. The frequencies were coming from deep beneath the surface, deeper than anything the colony's drills had reached. Whatever this was, it had been deliberately hidden. It was not meant to be found, but it was her only option now. The scan settled on a particular point, marked by a flashing red icon, a target on the interface. It was deeper than she'd ever imagined. The coordinates placed it beneath a massive plateau, far from any known settlements or geological formations that had been mapped. The structure wasn't just a ruin. It was a vault, sealed and waiting to be accessed. Astrid's pulse quickened. Her fingers hovered over the controls. The wind outside howled in the distance, as if the planet itself were warning her to turn back. She took a breath. She had come this far. The colony's survival depended on what she found. With a final, resigned push, she set the rover on its course, the screen flashing the route ahead. The journey would take several hours, but she knew what lay ahead. She would find the entrance. She had to. Hours passed in an eerie silence. The rover hummed along the dusty plains, the landscape unchanged as Mars seemed to stretch on infinitely. The deeper she went, the more the air in her suit seemed to press in on her, as if even the atmosphere here was heavy with unspoken secrets. The scanner kept pinging, showing movement, irregular like someone or something was responding to her approach. The frequency had shifted again, becoming more concentrated. Whatever was beneath the surface had noticed her, and it was waiting. Ahead, the plateau loomed, jagged rocks reaching up toward the sky like the bones of a forgotten giant. The rover's wheels kicked up clouds of red dust as it navigated toward the coordinates, its engine growling with the effort. She slowed the rover as she neared a large rock formation, the scanner indicating that the source of the signal was directly beneath. It was a perfect place for an entrance, hidden from sight, obscured by natural terrain, but the signal couldn't be denied. Astrid climbed out of the rover, her boots crunching on the dusty ground. She carried a portable drill, an experimental model that had never been used beyond basic geological surveys. The rock here was dense, compact, but she wasn't sure how far down she would need to go. Her hands trembled as she set the drill to work, the hum of the machine filling the air. Sweat slicked her forehead beneath the helmet, her breath coming in uneven gasps as she concentrated. With each minute that passed, the cold uncertainty crept further into her bones. The voice of the Martian entity still echoed in her mind, warning her, but it only strengthened her resolve. She would find it. She had to. The drill suddenly broke through a hard layer of rock, and with a jolt, the machine made contact with something solid, something far older than the layers of Martian soil around it. A faint metallic sound rang out. Astrid's heart skipped a beat. She had found it. The ground shifted beneath her feet. The door to whatever lay below was beginning to open, as though Mars itself had acknowledged her presence. But before she could react, a deafening roar pierced the air, like the very planet was screaming. Something was coming. Chapter 5, The Awakening. The ground beneath Astrid's boots trembled, a deep, resonant vibration that set her teeth on edge. Her hand instinctively shot to the rover's comms, but there was no response, just the same static hum that had greeted her before. She glanced up toward the jagged rock formation where she had drilled, the metallic sound still echoing from deep beneath the surface. Her heart pounded in her chest. The air around her felt heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the unease gnawing at her gut told her this was no accident. Whatever she had unearthed was alive. The frequency she had been chasing, the signal, it had led her here, and now there was no turning back. A deep, guttural rumble erupted from the ground, shaking her to the core. The metallic sound grew louder, almost rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something immense and ancient. The door, the entrance, was opening. She backed away slowly, the tremors beneath her feet growing more intense. Then, from beneath the rocky formation, a massive slab of metal began to rise, its surface covered in alien symbols, worn and faint but still visible. The design was intricate, like the language she had seen in the vision from the Martian pillar. As the slab ascended, the air seemed to ripple, distorting around it as if reality itself were bending under its weight. Astrid's breath caught in her throat. The door was alive, its movements deliberate, controlled. She could feel the ancient intelligence behind it. It wasn't just the Martian she had uncovered. It was something far more powerful, something that had been slumbering for millennia, waiting to be awakened. The slab rose fully, revealing a darkened chamber beyond. The entrance was wide enough for her to slip through, but as she hesitated at the threshold, the hum from inside intensified. It was as though the chamber was calling to her, beckoning her inside, drawing her closer. For a moment, Astrid's doubt crept in again. Had she gone too far? Was this the moment the Martians had warned her about? The moment where curiosity would cost her everything? No. The colony needed her. The people she had sworn to protect were running out of time. There was no choice. She had to see this through. With a deep, shuddering breath, she stepped forward into the blackness, the light from the rover's headlights fading as she descended into the unknown. The chamber was massive, the walls slick with something that shimmered, reflecting the faint glow of her suit's lights. The air was thick with a strange, musty smell, a staleness that spoke of centuries of isolation. The floor beneath her feet was smooth, almost like glass, and yet there was a palpable sense of pressure in the air. The pulse from deep within the chamber thrummed in her bones, reverberating through the walls. And then she saw it. At the far end of the chamber, something was illuminated by a soft, eerie glow. A massive structure, intricately designed, part machine, part organic. It was a sprawling network of interconnected nodes, cables, and what appeared to be organic tendrils. It looked like a fusion of technology and biology, an alien thing that seemed to breathe with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The heart of the Martian civilization, the source of the frequency. Astrid's eyes widened as she slowly advanced, her mind reeling with the implications of what she was seeing. This was no Martian relic. This was alive. The technology had evolved far beyond anything the Martians had been capable of. It had merged with the planet, with the very soul of Mars itself. "Who are you?" she whispered to the structure, her voice barely audible against the hum. The question was no longer just a search for knowledge. It had become a plea for understanding. In response, the structure seemed to stir. The tendrils of organic matter retracted slightly, and the metallic nodes began to pulse, faster, as if responding to her. "Human," a voice said, deep and resonant, not in her mind this time, but through the chamber. It was neither male nor female, but something else entirely, something ancient, powerful. "You seek to survive. You wish to live. But your kind, your species, you are already dying." Astrid's throat tightened. She wanted to respond, to argue, to plead, but the words caught in her chest. The truth of it was undeniable. The colony, her people, humanity's time on Mars was running out. The structure seemed to study her, if such a thing were possible. The glowing nodes dimmed and brightened in slow succession, almost like a pulse. "You are not the first," the voice continued, "to come here. Your kind came before you, seeking the same thing, survival. Knowledge. But they did not understand. They did not listen." A cold chill crept up Astrid's spine. She stepped back, her breath coming faster now. "Not the first? You cannot take what you do not understand," the voice warned. "The price is too high. The cost of knowledge is everything." For a moment, Astrid was paralyzed, caught in the weight of those words. She thought of the colony, of Luca, of the people who depended on her. But there was no turning back now. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What do I need to do? What must I do to save them?" The structure pulsed again, and the voice answered, its tone softer now. "You must accept the truth, human. The answer is not in the past. It is in the future." The walls of the chamber began to tremble. The organic tendrils uncoiled, revealing something at the heart of the structure, a seed, glowing faintly with a light that was not of this world. Astrid's heart skipped a beat as the seed seemed to call to her, its pulse in rhythm with her own. She didn't understand it, but she felt it. The answer was within reach. "Take it," the voice urged. "You must plant it on the surface of Mars. Only then can the balance be restored." For a moment, Astrid hesitated. The knowledge in her mind was still too much to bear, the weight of the past pressing down on her. But she knew this was the only way. The Martians had failed. But humanity, they could still save Mars. With trembling hands, she reached out and took the seed, the light from the structure dimming as it relinquished its hold. As she turned to leave, she looked back at the alien technology, the heart of the civilization, the last remnants of the Martians. And as she stepped out into the cold Martian night, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't just saving the colony anymore. She was saving Mars itself. The winds howled around her as she made her way back to the rover, the seed burning faintly in her hand. The journey ahead would be difficult, painful, even, but it was one that would restore the balance between Mars and Earth. And maybe, just maybe, humanity could find a new beginning here on the Red Planet. For the first time since arriving, Astrid felt hope stirring in her chest. The truth had cost her everything, but it had given her something more. It had given her a future. The end.